Couple of questions for you. Young people are overly sensitized and a bit privileged. Heard the expression snowflake? Put your hand up in the chat box if that resonates with you, or perhaps you think about one of your colleagues like that. Be interested to know. Here's another statement. Let me know if this resonates. The older generation are workaholics. Their work ethic is completely out of whack. There is a chasm of generational differences in the workplace. It's causing conflict, it's causing problems in the workplace. And Deloitte in 2020 said that generational differences are increasing. The perception of generational differences are increasing. So I've got an example of this. During the pandemic, I was coaching a board director, and he was a board director of many companies. He sat on the board of a lot of British companies. And during the pandemic, he felt that he had lost agency. He had lost his vitality. He felt that his role was being diminished. He felt despondent, depressed. We all did during the pandemic, obviously, but he felt really despondent. And this was because in his club in London, sorry, I dropped a pronoun there, forgive me, in their club in London, they saw all the traditional photographs, paintings of traditional people that had supported the UK. Christopher Wren, that had built London, St Paul's Cathedral, were being taken down and replaced. So the question I ask is, do we want any generation in the workplace to feel that they've lost agency? That's a reflective coaching question, because in coaching clients, in organizations, financial services is another classic, is that they're waiting for people to move on and to move through. They're waiting for the generations to roll through. And this conversation is all about retaining the gifts that every generation has. So the problems that we've got, the reason that we've got this chasm is because the generations don't mix in the way that they used to. So in the worldview, things are different. The younger generation want their freedom quicker. They want to be on the housing run quicker. They want to be leaving home quicker. And socially, the chasm is huge because of this intergenerational warfare on social media. Boomers taking up more money, not spending as well. Gen Z's really worrying about the future. Boomers moaning about the sensitivity of the younger generation, the traumas that they go through. And actually, it's not trauma. What we experienced at the end of the wars was very different. Their self-esteem for the older generation is built on hard work, whereas the younger generation, nah, it's not hard work. They just get by. They just do the minimum that's required. The older generation haven't adapted to cultural change. These are the issues, these are the things that are heard in the conversation, in the workplace and in the world. But how does it affect the workplace? Team conflict, problems within teams, hierarchy, not flatter structures, but hierarchical structures where you have the older generations at the top dictating what's going through. We'll work through all this. And we have a younger generation that have that loss of agency. They don't feel that they are in control. They're not being heard. And because they're not being heard, because their creativity is being stalled, they're feeling stressed. And this is turning up in the workplace as absences. They're not turning up to work, or if they're turning up to work, it's presenteeism, their minds are elsewhere. So the whole organisation suffers. Lack of productivity, lack of motivation for the staff. The younger generation are seen as less resilient. I've heard this time and time again working in organisations. The younger generation are just not strong. Small issues make them feel exhausted. What happens in some of the industries is they just leave. The job's too big. The work position needs flexibility. It needs cultural change. So the question is, how do we get over this chasm? Even if you identify with a different generation or a certain generation, what are your views holding you back? Building a better future will depend on our ability to appreciate generational differences. And this is by a social futurist, by Mal Fletcher. Harmony in the workplace. Being curious is not about being right. We need allyship in the workplace, in the same that we've done with the DE&I space. We want to be imperfect about moving forward. And Brené Brown talks about being excellent or striving for excellence, which is growth, rather than perfectionism, which is defensiveness. So this generational difference means that people feel that maybe the younger generation are being confident, they're calling it confidence, but actually it's arrogance. So what we're going to talk about are the 5 generational sticking points and the myths around them. So the sticking points for the generations have been well documented. Technology is a classic, how the generations deal with technology, communication, the different styles of communication between the generations, how the different generations deal with feedback, interesting one, what their leadership styles are like, their attitude towards time management and the perception of time management, and the cultural change within the workplace, not being able to deal with that, more freedom, and the promotions of the organizational structure. So if we don't tackle these problems, it has a twofold effect. Firstly, even if you don't identify as a boomer, you might identify with some of the beliefs that the boomers have carried. So even if you don't identify as a millennial, you might have absorbed some of the beliefs that millennials have. So if we don't move on, if we don't absorb everybody's changes, nothing will change. So I just want to talk very quickly about a psych insight. Transactional analysis. This is the parent, adult, child conversations that we have at home and in the workplace. So our parental conversation could be the beliefs that we have from our parents, from your parents, from my parents. These beliefs come from a nurturing parent or a controlling parent. Sometimes you hear the word should. These are beliefs that have been handed down. The adult conversation is when we approach a conversation with humility and we don't get too upset. And then obviously there's the child, where the child can either be free, wow, big exclamation marks, lots of energy, or it can be adapted. It can make those changes that they want the adult to hear. We want a communication style that is adult to adult. And if we don't make the changes in the generations, if we don't listen to each other, we'll end up repeating the same thing. History will repeat itself. History has always repeated itself. So even if you don't identify as a boomer or a millennial or a Gen Z, you may still have the belief systems filtered down through our parenting that we're not aware of. And just another small insight here before we start casting the blame through amongst the generations. Parenting didn't start until, give me a shout out when you think that the books came out and the insights came out on parenting. Well, the first book, was in 1540. The second book was in 1945, Dr. Spock. Unbelievable. And that's when people started to become more aware of parenting. So it's no wonder that some of us have got these belief systems that have been entrenched. They came from a generation that didn't know how to parent. Here are the generations. This is the attitudes to life and to work. The first one is the traditionalist. They are very thrifty. They're born in 1928 to 45. They came out of the Depression. Their work attitude is about respecting authority. They're loyal. They're incredibly hardworking and they persevere even when there are obstacles. Hard work will get you through. They came from the Depression, so they have a strong, strong work ethic. Their values are all about social ties, family, safety, security, consistency, and tradition. So put your hands up, let me know. Even if you don't identify as a traditionalist, do those values resonate with you? Do those values make you feel that they are part of your life? So even if you are an alpha, a millennial, maybe you have some of those traditionalist views. Events in this lifetime were things like McCarthyism, the Red Scare. So everybody was terrified of communism, the Korean War, and the civil rights movement. The leadership style of a traditionalist is very controlling. Do as you are told. The boomers, 1945 to 64. Hands up, any in the room? Boomers? So boomers are very positive. They are all about excitement. Why wouldn't they? After the Second World War, the world was at their feet. They were prosperous, optimistic. They had the NHS. They had huge amounts of self-worth. And their work attitude was hard work and dedication. Their leadership style is follow our lead. We know what's best, directing. And they had events like the assassination of Kennedy, landing on the moon, the end of the Vietnam War. They really saw some change. Generation X. So if the traditionalists are silent generation and the boomers are excited and they have prosperity, the Generation X is the forgotten generation. They suffered. So we mentioned earlier about parenting books coming about in the 1945s. So the baby boomers that were looking after Gen X, they were starting to instill these parenting practices. However, this is the age of the latchdoor kids. This is the high age of single parents. You've got one parent, both parents working, and work is seen as a sense of accomplishment, but work is a job. It's a way to provide for themselves. The job is not everything. In 2030, they're going to be 23% of the workforce. Millennials, 19, hands up millennials, give me a shout out. So millennials, 1981, 1996, they're emotionally educated. They've been educated by the Stoics, who are the boomers, the Generation X, who were the forgotten generation, the latchdoor kids. These Generation X, they had to be self-sufficient. They had to figure things out. And the millennials have benefited from that. And as a consequence of a second generation of parenting, millennials are emotionally educated. They are natural networkers. They are tech savvy. They are the original digital generation. Their values are always about being authentic and transparent, and they had events like the 2007 financial crisis, the Gulf War, and the explosion of social media. Their work attitude is life is beyond the job. And in 2030, they're going to be 32% of the workforce. Gen Zs. Hands up if I've got any Gen Zs. Now, Gen Zs are the sensitized generation. Trauma to Gen Zs is called out all the time. But trauma is not the trauma that the baby boomers experience. It's not death and destruction of the wars, but it is the shadow of that. Holocaust survivors, this is another psych insight, Holocaust survivors will let us know that it takes 7 generations for that trauma to move through. Our elders tell us this. So even if they haven't seen those traumas, they haven't experienced them firsthand, they're still working through the trauma from previous generations, and they call it out. If somebody is feeling offensive to them, they will call it out. Their values are about being skeptical. They want to know where the organization is putting their profits. They socially support movements like Black Lives Matter, transgender rights, climate change. And in the workforce in 2030, they are going to be the biggest population in the workforce. Alphas. They're all about transparency. They're all about responsibility. So they're going to start coming in to the workforce, and they are very keen to be seen and heard as being responsible. It's absolutely vital to them. So these generationals will be in the workforce, and even if they're not in the workforce, the shadow of their belief system and the shadow of what they've been through will also be in the workforce. So if we don't humanize the workforce, if we don't bring these generations together, then we're not going to get into the next generation. So the traditionalists, the silent generation, their leadership style is controlling. The boomers, their leadership style is very directing. Gen X, their leadership style is very coordinating. Millennials, their leadership style is very guiding. Gen Z's, iGen, love that. They are very empowering. And Gen Alphas, well, they want to be inspired. So if we are aware that the world is accelerating and we need to humanize the workplace, the generations are part of the human continuum. We need them. We need to see and use the gifts from each generation. And if we suppress the younger generations, the millennials, the Gen Zs, the Gen Alphas, they will feel frustrated and they will leave. If we ignore the older generations, Gen X, baby boomers and traditionalists, even if their views are still not heard, then they won't show us how to cope. So today we're going to talk about 5 myths and how we can bust those generational myths. And these are the beginning of the story of what we can do. The first myth, and I'm sure you've heard this, the younger generation is too big for their boats. That should say boots. The younger generation is too big for their boots. They need to earn their stripes. You heard that expression before? They need to be understand the difference between confidence and arrogance, because they want everything. They don't want to do the work in the way that the older generation did. They want to get those generational stripes straight away. They want to be successful straight away. And the senior teams, well, they find that difficult because they haven't earned their stripes. So they see, for an example, is in financial services, a team that I was coaching and working with training, was that one part of the team was seen as too confident. They were being really arrogant about, in financial services, regulations. They were trying to stick to the regulations. Whereas the other team members who were trying to push the business forward felt that they were killing the business. So that communication crisis, that lack of understanding, of hearing what was going on, that harping back to regulation, that could come from anywhere. So is this a power struggle? Is this about the older generation not relinquishing power? They've managed through secrecy and retaining information, and the younger generation feel disempowered and frustrated. And what does this look like in the business world? Well, it looks like the younger generation are missing deadlines. They're stubborn. Their values are not being noticed. They're being misaligned within the organization. And it means that the older generation are being very commanding and very demanding. So the first myth, that the younger generation is too big for their boots, no. The myth busting is the older generation are not giving them access. They're not listening to them. They're not giving them that freedom. They're not aligning their business values with what the younger generation needs. So the solution, moving on to the solution, as leaders, whether you're a leader of a team, a leader of yourself, or a leader at home, is to show courage. Be confidential with your conversations and show humility. Understand the difference between being commanding and coaching. In 2020, I wrote a white paper where we tried to influence the financial services division and the legal section by talking about how we can improve coaching in the workplace. So coaching is very, very different from mentoring. Having a mentor is having a sponsor, someone that will help you to get up to the next level, vital in the workplace. Coaching is a way of having a conversation that will help to get the best out of your team member. Now, whether that's a team member within your team or a team member above you, upwardly managing, or whether it's a team member at home, these skills are vital. As I understand it, what I'm hearing from you, so what I think you're feeling, these are coaching techniques, coaching questions, which gives us that level of humility that allows the person to be heard fully. That's the solution. The second myth, have you ever heard this one? The younger generation are slackers. Well, where's that film from? So that's how long each generation have been told that they're slackers, that they get bored easily. Is that true? What do you think? They lack commitment? Well, let me ask you a question. When do you feel most productive? When are you on fire? Is it A, when you've had back-to-back meetings all day? Are you creative? Are you productive then? Is it B, when you've just been on holiday and you've come back and you're feeling free as a bird? So it might feel as if the generation is being a slacker, but the myth buster actually is the younger generation are not interested if they are not motivated. We saw how Gen Alphas need to be inspired. Millennials need to be motivated. They need to feel passionate. They're not slackers. They're just not interested. They want to understand the bigger picture. So the solution is about being rested and different types of rest so that we can align the values of the generation. We have a mindset shift around rest. So the older generation are going to see rest as giving them perspective, and the younger generation sees it as also giving them perspective and creativity. So the solution is get more rest. If you get more rest, you're going to be more productive and you're going to feel more creative. The next myth: the older generations can't change. They're resistant to change. They saw the biggest change in our world today. My dad tells me the story about going to the cinema, which he used to do every Saturday. Can't remember any of the films that he used to go and watch, but maybe some of you could tell me. But he used to get Champion the Wonder Horse, just remembered. He used to love going to the cinema every Saturday, and as a boy through the war. And then after the war, they started to have concerts and they started to listen to popular music, rock concerts. They got so excited, so adrenaline filled. They had never heard music like it. They started ripping up the cinema seats. Have we had a generational change in our lifetime where we felt that moved that we had to do something about it? Yes, we have. But so have the older generation. They are able to change. They have had huge emotional change, and the younger generation have had massive technical change. So we have had change. And the interesting thing is, Deloitte in 2020, the first phrase that I used at the beginning, they will have change if it relates to their careers. And we want the same thing amongst the generations. So when Deloitte actually went through the whole research, the perception was that the generations were getting bigger, but actually the reality is that perception, what we all want is the same in terms of our career. So we want flexibility, we want loyalty from our colleagues, we expect advancement. And in a bigger world, we're all looking for meaning. We're all looking for purpose. It's good for our health. We've got that vision. We're looking for good leaders. All of us are looking for good leaders, and we're all looking for personal and professional change. The millennials, the younger generation, are better at expressing that. But the older generation are very good at doing that as well. So the fourth myth that we're going to uncover today is the younger generation just don't have any resilience. The younger generation are too emotional, they're too soft, they're too sensitive, and they've got this kind of moral high ground about what we should all be doing. They're a little bit righteous, a little bit indignant about not being heard. But the approach that I take and the solution to this is to reflect that. Oh, I'm going to go back one. So the older generation look at Stoicism, and that is becoming trendy again. It's starting to come up in podcasts and social media posts about Stoicism versus Epicureanism. So Stoicism, as we saw in the older generations, was that inability to be emotionally available. So the traditionalists, the silent generation, when the boomers came along, their parents weren't emotionally available. But Epicureanism is hedonism. It's about going out and having fun. And we can see these belief systems rippling down through all generations. There's still a little bit of Stoicism to help us get through, but there's still that little bit of hedonism to help us have fun. And it's merging those two together. So the older generation used to believe that facts trump emotions. But what that looks like in the workplace, if we don't work on it, is that arguments will happen, misunderstandings because of miscommunication. The older generation will detach from emotions, whereas a huge skill of leadership is filling the dream, is giving that dream, that vision to everybody else. And the younger generation believe that emotions are central to delivering that dream. So it's no longer the place that emotions are not welcome, because emotions deliver the dream. A little sprinkling of Stoicism wouldn't go amiss, but that feeling that a dream is going to help you to get there through emotions is a leadership skill. So younger generation are resilient. If they're on board and they understand what's going on, they are resilient. So when you think of resilience, who would you consider of all the people that you know, perhaps a grandparent or a parent or somebody from the media, who would you consider a superhero of yours that have just come back time after time? Well, I'm going to show you mine. This is my icon of resilience, Yoda. Why? Well, as I was growing up, Star Wars, Gen X, very, very popular. And Yoda had the biggest resilience skill that I wanted, mental resilience. And building your mental resilience muscle was what I was all about. And then I understood that resilience is a skill that you can learn, first and foremost. But secondly, resilience isn't just about mental strength. Resilience isn't just about Stoicism. It isn't just about buttoning up and carrying on. Resilience has levels. It has platforms. If you've ever seen the Celtic Cross has 4 parts to it, and each part is even. And those parts build your resilience framework. So the way that I work with organizations and individuals is making sure that each one of those resilience frameworks is in place. You start with the spirituality, or as otherwise known, the vision. The foundation for that comes from physical resilience. And most organizations have now got that in place. EAPs, getting support for workshops and things like that, for nutrition, for sleep, physical resilience, base platform. And then you have mental resilience. So, for example, if a paramedic was turning up to a problem a situation, they wouldn't ask everybody, so what's the vision here? What are we going to do? Are we all on board? No. Everybody has a role. Everybody knows what they're going to do and they get on with the job. That's mental resilience. It's not emotional. They don't get on board first. They deal with the problem. Emotional resilience is layered in on top. Emotional resilience is what gives us the action to get to our dream, to give us that spirituality. So it's like the Celtic cross. It all moves as one. Brains and heart will win over muscle in the future of work. That's a London School of Economics. So the heart with brains will future-proof your job. So it means we need that emotional resilience skill. We need to lead with our heart. We need to be candid and create that psychological safety in our workplaces. And the future of work will mean that that will be successful. The fifth myth. The older generation have a communication bias to button up. Possibly. Stoicism again, button up, keep quiet and carry on. But the busting myth from that is that they're not archaic. They actually want to be cool. They want to retain agency. The example that I gave you at the beginning about the board director going into his club and seeing everything around him disappearing, everything that he was used to. So yes, the change is stark. Yes, the change has been challenging, but he still wants to retain agency. And by being open about that, by speaking about it, because that's what the pandemic has done for everyone, we are aware. So the solution to this, and the way I approach this, is a 6-step communication style. What is your communication style? And we will help to make sure that everybody is on the same playing field. They understand where we're going. So Deloitte has said the readiness gap. And the readiness gap means that 70% of organizations recognize that they need to be multi-generational. We need to work together in order to create that creativity that comes from the younger generation and the stoicism and that ability to move through and get on from the older generation. We need both of those messages, but only 10% of organizations are ready. That study's from Deloitte. So if we do want to build a better future, if we do want to depend on our ability to appreciate the generational difference. So I ask you again, how do you feel about this statement? Young people are oversensitive and privileged. Maybe they are, but that's a good thing. They're teaching us how to move forward. Older generations are workaholics. Their work ethic is out of whack. Maybe they are, but that's what we need. We need to have a sprinkling of both. We need to take the positives and the negatives of both and be aware and have that resilience and the strength to push back through change. And we need the communication styles that will help us to do that. So I'm going to leave you with that question and that reflective thought. And I'd like to introduce you to the Generational Dream Team. Contact us for coaching, keynote, and training. Thank you very much.